Okay. Good morning, everyone. For those of us stateside, good evening, good afternoon for those in Europe, and I think we've even got some folks out far east. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tom Morris, as you saw in the video. So my full-time job is Advanced Work Packaging Center of Excellence Lead. I'm at ExxonMobil, so we have a team here dedicated to promoting AWP and helping our projects roll that out. And I'm here before you today as a representative of CII's AWP Joint Working Group. You'll hear us call it the JWG. And we're here to talk to you today about data requirements and digital threads. So Steve, next slide. There we go. So the agenda of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give us a brief introduction and scene set, and then pass it over to my colleagues. So John Banda will be covering a session on how to create a digital thread. And then Yogesh will be taking us through a case study, and Ted Weitzman will jump in for an interview. We're looking forward to that being pretty interactive. And then we'll recap the session, and we've tried to engineer here a lot of time for questions and answers because we think that's where a lot of the value of these types of sessions comes from. Okay, so several folks on this line, we've presented a few times to industry now about these data requirements and digital threads, but recognizing a new audience in front of us, some of you may be familiar with some of this work, but I'm expecting that many of you, this may be new. So we don't want to rehash all those previous presentations, but did want to provide a quick scene set as to what this work entailed. So if we rewind maybe about a year and a half ago, as we try to bring together tool sets to match our processes and what we're trying to do with AWP, one of the things that keeps rearing its head is data challenges. And I actually listened into the Shell presentation yesterday. Thought that was excellent, and it really captured well some of what it takes to pull all this together. And I would echo what was shared there in that we really don't want to do this in silos and everyone try to reinvent their own wheel. That's not the right way to approach this. I think there's a collaborative way that we can start to work to standardize some of this. And that's exactly what happened last year, a collaboration through CII. Great backstory there, I won't get into all that, but two key deliverables that I wanted to highlight. So the first is a set of AWP data requirements. And we'll get into a little more detail about what that means. Another key research deliverable was building upon that, a series of digital threads that can integrate supply chain information. So the diagram there on the right points out, gives just kind of an overall graphic of what the data requirements are mapped against the AWP process. I'm not going to get into all those boxes. It's just kind of try to give a sense of the scope that was covered. Before I hand it over to John, there's something I wanted to speak to, and that's around what do we do with this? And that's a question we've gotten asked a lot, right? It's like, all right, we got this set of AWP data requirements, we got some of the digital threads defined.
I'll be starting off
but now, what do you do with it? How do you implement this
serum.
stuff?
It really hydrates my
for me, that's a little bit of a tough question to answer. It's almost like being asked, well, okay, you have a hammer, what do you do with it? It's like, well, you do a lot of stuff with it, right? It depends on the use case that you're trying to solve. So I want to try to, before we get into all the brilliant detail that's going to come after this, just take a step back and a very high level, how does this fit in? And I'm going to speak a little more fundamentally around the data requirements themselves. The data requirements work has done the hard part of figuring out what data attributes you need to execute whatever mission you're after. And if I'm I'm actually gonna lean on the Shell presentation again yesterday. I remember the quote, an Amazon-like visibility into across engineering, across procurement and supply chain. So let's say my mission is I want to integrate pipe fabrication data, and I want that to be fully visible all the way through engineering, through fabrication, and understand what's coming, when it's going to show up, so I can effectively plan my work in the field. So, okay. Probably the very first thing you're going to do as part of the exercise is figure out, well, what data do I need exactly to go implement that? Enter the data requirements. There is one of those little boxes that's probably hard to read, is piping fabrication. You can go in there and it will give you a whole set of data requirements. that you can use as a starting point as you enter into your own journey. So I think they're very versatile. It's a resource that you can use, if you're an EPC, an owner, even suppliers can leverage this to help you with whatever challenge you're trying to solve in your own business. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna pass it off and looking forward to some more detail. So take it away, John.
Thank you, Tom. So my name is John Banda. I work for Autodesk, but I was a member of this team working on these data requirements for a good 6 or 9 months, putting them together. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about how you can use what Tom has described as that starting point to try to map it to what you have already and create that digital thread. So, like Tom showed on his last slide, there are 2 reports that I use to pull this together. One is a special report, and the other is the actual data requirement tables that come in an Excel format. Now, these are available
you and
for
your
all
friends are
CII
financially
members
irresponsible
internally, but they're also
idiots.
available to the
Without
public.
telling
So
me you and your
really
friends are
recommend
financially
if you're designing a
irresponsible
digital thread,
idiots.
go and download these, take a look, and I'll go through some of the references as I go through the presentation. So what I want to show you is what is the definition of a digital thread. We hear a lot of different terms: digital thread, data requirement, digital deliverable. What do those mean? What are the differences? So I'll give you a kind of an idea of what that might look like. And then once you understand what those are, what the different definitions are, how do you start? Where do you
Striving
choose
to
that
get
starting
food.
point?
Why are you breaking? Oh no.
What we found as we went through them and created the data requirements. Then we'll
Striving to get food.
digital thread and
Why are you breaking? Oh no.
Work-face planning. So, you can create the thread, but without that delivery, you're not getting those results you're looking for of actual package management and work-face planning. And then once you have those first threads, how do you maintain them as you bring additional threads online? So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So we'll define the data requirement first, and I'm not going to read all of this to you. I have it here for your reference, but a data requirement would be those attributes that you need to create work packages, to track work packages. And so this is very specific. I need EWP numbers or a CWP number. What is the exact attribute that I need to complete that AWP process? Now, this is different from, say, a digital deliverable, which would be the container that holds that AWP information. So it could be a virtual construction model, that could be a 3D model, an equipment list, P&IDs, any 1D, 2D, or 3D source. Where are you getting that attribute information from? That's usually going to be your digital deliverable. And then so how does that play with a digital thread? A digital thread would be the representation of all the digital activities that you have to do to get to that data requirement. So this could be design reviews, markups, approval workflows, inspections, or communication, all of which go to creating a deliverable that meets that data requirement. So how do you start? Which ones do you choose? Well, there are a lot of threads, and this is just a short list. I've kind of summarized it up like engineering lists I packaged together. But you can see that some of these threads cross multiple project stages, and some of them are really specific to only 1 or 2 stages. So in the for instance, the master index, that's one of those that really sets the foundation for all your AWP organization. If the project was started with AWP in mind, you may not need to create an AWP master index if you're only focused on construction. However, if it wasn't created with AWP in mind, this is a task you may need to do before you begin. So the AWP master index is a core across all of the deliverables because it ties them together. But let's say you're only doing detailed engineering. Maybe you're focused mainly on, say, procurement or the model or the engineering lists. You're really wanting to choose a thread that meets your project need, that meets your project goals. You don't have to take on all of the threads to achieve AWP. You can really choose your starting point based on where you are in your project, what your goals are, and what your delivery needs are. And of course, maybe you're focused on construction, and the key thing you're trying to get from AWP is better site material management. So don't feel like you have to take on this entire framework in one go. You really can pick and choose your starting point based on where you are and where you want to go. Now, how does this tie into our current digital deliverables? So within the framework that we've given you, we do have some recommendations or ideas of where you could look, but we hesitate to tell you this is where you get it because each organization is different. So you may be able to gather some of this information from plot plans or document registers, equipment lists, or the model. So we try to give you an idea of where to look, but we leave the choice up to you on where to find the relevant information you need to meet that data requirement. So this is a look at the actual data requirement tables. So on the left, you're going to see the index summary of the data requirement numbers. These oftentimes tie to a digital thread name. And then for each one of these, we've created subtables with all the attributes that you would need to execute that section. So for instance, the master index or the schedule, document control, steel and structural fabrication, piping fabrication, they're all here for you. So once you decide which thread you want to tackle, you can go into these subtables and, like Tom said, easily reference and grab a starting point of the attributes we've taken the time to research to see what would be required to meet that section. So to create this thread using this information, understand what you currently have. What data is available to you from the data requirements, what research is available to you from CII. Understanding what you have is going to keep you from doing what Tom had said earlier of reinventing the wheel or creating new workflows and creating new complicated ways of having to work together. Once you know where your gaps are, as far as which attributes you have, which ones you don't, prioritize those. You'll see in a lot of the information we give, we list attributes, in some cases, optional. It's really if you find value in it. So we don't give you just, these are only the ones you need. We've also given you ones we thought might be helpful to give you ideas to prioritize what's important to you. Now, determine where to collect the data. A lot of this information can be grabbed from multiple sources. Sometimes you want it from the very root source. Sometimes you want it after it's been qualified a bit. For instance, you may not want to grab it from a PFD. You may want it from a PNID or from a 3D model. So understanding where you want to collect that data and mapping it out is going to be really important to you as you mature these threads over time. And then review these options before implementing a solution so you can decide together. As Tom said, there are so many different people and organizations involved in this process. Being able to say, I was a part of the decision to how we work, really gets you buy-in across that thread, and that gives everyone feeling like they have an ownership, a stake in producing that deliverable. So a digital thread framework, this is a good list, a good overview of how many different digital threads they are and how they can come together in a virtual environment to create work packages or a virtual construction model. Sometimes you'll use one or the other. A lot of times you'll use both. And I've taken the time to highlight which one of these we've already given you some preliminary data for. Now you can see that there's still, let me go back here, there we go, that there's still some blue here that we have not gotten to yet. This is an evergreen work that we are constantly developing and growing, and we do not say that this is the absolute end of what you need. It's just something that can help you get started understanding how these digital threads come together for you to produce work packages and manage constraints. So we've got these threads, you're starting to develop them, and how do you maintain them? As you pull more threads online, how do you make sure that the new work you're creating and the new threads still play well and work well with what you have already? So documenting these threads are really important, and we've given you sort of a walkthrough, a guide on what we think is important for managing that thread. So things like on the left, you'll see we've given you the names of the attributes, whether it's required or optional, and what we're thinking, the definition of what that information is. But we also know there's importance to what is the business process for this? What are we trying to do with it? What's that purpose? Where is the source of the information? What project phase or phases does it belong to? And then how often do we need to update this? Do I need it weekly? Do I need it monthly? Sometimes you'll need it more frequent early and less frequent later. So understanding how often you need that will help you really design how everyone and your systems need to work together. I also wanted to point out that within each one of these sections, we have written out some of our thoughts, ideas, some of the discussion and debate that we went through in this process. And you'll see in some cases, in particular for this thread, that we give a recommendation of where we think you might be able to find that information. And in this case, in your ERP system. So we've tried to give you an idea of where you might look, but we've hesitated to tell you that's the source. Now, just some conclusions to cover really quickly. Understand the differences between a data requirement, a digital deliverable, and a digital thread. They can get really confusing, especially when you see them as DR, DD, and DT. But knowing what those differences are really help you frame your discussions on what you're creating in that scope of work. Choose your digital thread. Understand what your scope is, where you want to go, and what you want to achieve. You don't have to take them all at once. You build on them over time. Continue to grow your digital threads. Compare your data requirements to the digital deliverables. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't create new work processes just to create these data requirements. Take advantage of what you already do well. And then deliver that information to work-based planning. Make sure that they're getting what they need to do the job for AWP to be successful. And then finally, document and maintain your threads. Anyway, I hope you found this valuable. Thank you very much for your time. Yogesh?
Thank you. Thank you, John. It's taken over. Steve, if you could advance this to the next slide, yeah. Right. Great. So I'm Yogesh Srivastava, CEO of TechnoBuild. Today in this session, participating as TechnoBuild, but also you've seen me earlier as co-chair for COA. So, John, I mean, 3 new acronyms, DR, DD, DT. So we certainly add to the list of the EWPs, AWP, and IWPs. Anyways, let's move on. I'm going to share with you a little bit some practical application of what I would say data and digital threads. If you could advance it to the next slide. It's based on the excerpts from a large joint venture project being handled out of Europe. But let me start by saying there is, to be honest, abundance of data. And it is out there in various vertical towers. The SAPs, the JD Edwards, the 3D model, the Primaveras, everywhere we have data. And data on its own, however, I'll say is inherently blind. Unless we can take that information and route it so that it reaches the right person at the right time, and we get the right, say, action utilizing the data on a timely basis. So this one is courtesy McKinsey. They had done a study and shown all the digitalization effort that goes on in our space. And as you see, a lot of blue dots where things can be going digital, but if you don't have a process behind it, you can see all these threads that connect from one system to another. It becomes so unmanageable that what I said, routing the information to the person who needed it, if it comes a week, 2 weeks, or in a 3-week time frame through 5 different people, we basically lost the initiative there. So the invisible problem is not the digitalization, the blue dot, it's the gray behind that you see when you're trying to unravel data from the various systems that are out there. And in a mature EPC contractor, certainly this was a big challenge in front of us. And at the same time, when you have 2 major giants, one from an engineering side, the other from construction, both parties have, the whole effect gets compounded because both parties have different systems. So it in fact becomes even more challenging. Next slide, please. So when we talk about digital threads, certainly if you look at it from a process-based view, we have to look at it, what steps are followed. And if you look at advanced work packaging, it certainly gives us a structured way to see the data develop from one stage to another, going from the block of what I would say a list of CWPs in path of construction and a plot plan index where you marked it up as to where these are, the master document register, the engineering work packages, construction work packages, and all of that following the AWP process certainly gives the ability to start streamlining this data in a much more simplified way. And please advance to the next one. There's a little bit of an effect here. So that's one part of it. And along with that, we introduced what we would say is the planning component, the model, the supply chain aspect of it, collecting the data and presenting it to the decision makers on a control tower, and also a few other things such as 3D model as you start getting into detail engineering. Because quite often we anchor a lot of our data from the 3D model as the origin, but a lot gets done ahead of the 3D model. For the 3D model to be useful, it needs to be around 60% complete. So what about the data prior to that? How do I handle that? So we looked at it from a stage ahead of the 3D model. And last but not the least is one more aspect, Steve, if you could forward this, is what action are you taking in terms of what information you're getting. So when you combine the flow of AWP with certain aspects of utilization of data, now you are able to see from an end-to-end perspective in a simplified way in a process-based view. But that's not enough. I mean, next please, Steve. What's also important is when we were implementing the digital platform, it is also usually data alone cannot do things. You do need somebody who's interacting with the data. And that part, again, involves the people side of things. So if you look at the overall flow, Steve, please advance. You need visibility and control during design delivery, so certain aspects of data follow here. And of course, on the other side, you need the certainty in the on-site execution. Data is getting generated from the field as well that is needed, and all of that feeds into the control tower. But at the same time, it's the people connectivity with the data and amongst themselves. Please advance, Steve. And the consumers of data or these digital threads become an important part. So when we talk about integration, collaboration, it's just not software to software. It is also software to people and the people to people who work in various departments and functions and really hold on to data. They don't want to give you the information, it is in my spreadsheet. So more than the software, the challenges have mainly department and function side. Give that information. No, that is what the answer is. To break down those barriers amongst the people was the bigger task than just the software integration of APIs and everything else. That was easy, I would say. So process plus people, along with the digital threads, they all thrive and are connected in between. And that's important when you start implementing from a data perspective. Next slide, please. What we saw as advantages already now, almost 18 months into the job, is certainly a data and a digital thread view leads into process improvement and it brings optimization for execution. But more importantly, it's the instantaneous visibility and the granularity that you need so that the accountability of who's producing this work package or who signed off on it and accepted it, the digital footprint is maintained if you follow the digital thread so that you can always look back and see what was done. And The other important aspect of it is we have now got a full communication where anything, if it is changed, gets relayed, the whole thread gets disturbed, and you can see what is being changed, what is being revised, or what's being deleted, etc. That gets revealed very quickly. And of course, at this moment, with the control tower in place, we are helping with significant intelligence and getting all this data to help in decision making. Otherwise, data is, as I said, blind. Data becomes dark data if it is out there and stored and not revealed to anybody. So ultimately, we need intelligence and the ability to do faster decision making, some predictions, and all of that can be done on the backbone of what you have just heard from my colleagues, John and Tom. And over to you, Ted.
Actually, I'm Ted Weitzman with ConstructX, Director of Delivery Excellence, and I actually think we're going to usurp Mr. Lloyd Rankin to ask us some questions, Yogesh.
So I'm here, and these are things that I've heard from owners and contractors and vendors, and so I'll just give them to you one at a time. The first question is, I've heard companies say, look, we've got great systems and we've got our own great data requirements, and they work for us. Why should we follow the CII recommendations?
Can I take a stab at that first, Yogesh?
Yeah, please go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, so I would say it's not, I wouldn't recommend following the CII recommendations. I'd recommend using them. Right, and be very active and purposeful in your use of the CII data requirements as published. And I would say that they are less prescriptive than they are suggestive of what you should have to facilitate your AWP execution on any given project. And one of in conversations with an owner very recently, I mean, as early as this week, the concept in their utilization was using it as a delta to compare against their current, as they would say, great systems and great set of data requirements they've already created and probably been using for years. But they're using the CI data requirements to identify deltas. What did they miss? And also to ask, to find the right questions to ask. Why did you include that? What is that? I'm not quite clear I understand why we would need that. And then to have dialogue in an open forum about what that requirement is and why the team decided to include it. So I would say it's less follow and more be very proactive in your use.
Ted, I'll add here a personal anecdote as well. Early in 2013, when we were new into AWP and I was working on a refinery project, 6 or 8 project directors for the various units for LC Finer, Hydrotreater, Hydrotractor, each one of them had their own kingdom. And it was very difficult to convince that we should all follow some things as standardized, as simple as coding, naming, etc. Each unit had it, they were going in a different direction. But what happened was very timely that the CII publication, the book said this. And interestingly, having contributed to that, but when you see it in a book, when you put it out there, it becomes a very good way to defend your position when you are new in AWP, you're trying to do something. Internally also, there are a lot of struggles. I would say use CII to promote that, it's been thought through. There are people who spend time in putting together. I'm not asking something out of the moon. It's here. So I say use it.
Great. Well, thank you. The next question, Steve, I'm having trouble getting it to, there you go. Okay, so how would you recommend that you use data requirements and digital threads in contracts? That's a really popular question.
Again, happy to address that first, Yogesh, unless you'd like to go.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if it is not in CDRL contractual document or data requirements list, you're not getting it. Number one. And once you put it that if you want it in CDRL, please also specify, is it when everything is done, then you will get it, or do you need as it goes progressively, right? And the third part is also, even if you put it in there and it's all in there and you've specified it, you do have to end up enforcing the contract through, I would say, you got it in the contract, but have some focus group session and do some early checks of if everything's going right. So that's what it is. I would say that it is important to utilize in your contracts. And if you haven't clearly specified, at least say as per CII guideline or something, and that can help you get further along.
I would agree with everything Yogesh just stated and also punctuate one of the things that the data requirements as published by CI brought to the owners, and I apologize, Paul isn't seasoned here in the South and in the United States, is this validation, right? This external validation of it's not just us asking and asking a particular vendor or provider to jump through hoops. It is, hey, it's not just us. It is this consortium. It is this industry recognized body of people that got together and said this is the requirement. And if you question that, it's more about your capability than it is our request. So I would say to absolutely leverage the data requirements in that way.
Great. Well, thanks for that comment. And next question is, did the owners develop these recommendations by themselves, or did they involve contractors, technology companies, vendors? How did you come up with these recommendations?
Yogesh, can I address that? All the above. The owners were the impetus of the development of the AWP data requirements, which is a story I'm happy to tell because it was a very exciting sort of set of events that led to their development, and it was definitely owner driven. But in the actual development, you have a representation that developed the data requirements that is part of this team that you see here today, where we all have represent different segments of industry. We have an owner here leading us, both introducing us and going to close us out. And we really were very purposeful, and I say we because I was part of the team that developed the data requirements, as were many on the call today. We were very purposeful in our development of the data requirements and who participated in making sure that we had representatives from all these segments. So what I would say is that lends it credibility. So it was definitely not the owners in a vacuum, but I think it was very important that the owners led it. But I pulled up the data requirements earlier that anybody can go to the CII website and download. If you just do a Google search for AWP, CII AWP data requirements, the first link, Google search, will take you to the knowledge base page. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can just download them. And if you pull up the Excel file, the title page or the first sheet on the Excel file, you will actually see the leads in phase 1 and phase 2 development of the data requirements led publication, and you will see some names that are here present today, but you will actually see the names and the companies that were represented in the development of the data requirements, which is just fantastic.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And another question that I get quite frequently is, okay, you came up with these requirements. Now what? Are they going to be updated over time? Are they done and that's it? So what would your response be to that?
Evergreen. Nothing is ever quote unquote done, except for cakes maybe, and then you eat them. But when it comes to our industry and the development of any practice, like the AWP best practice itself, or these data requirements, the intent is to get feedback to update frequently as both technologies and the process change. And it is fully intended that these data requirements be iteratively published and updated with input from industry.
Great.
Comment on that. As I see it currently, largely the requirements are design tools and authoring tool centric as to what you're putting information for in the documents, isometrics, supply chain systems, etc. But I'm sure we will evolve this to have some execution-centric data requirements in terms of field progress and visuals and other things. We ourselves in COA are looking at adding that component to what is already been done. So that is the data coming from an execution perspective that lets you know where we are with getting work done.
Great. So the other question I get, and I'm also on the joint working group, so I have been corrected many times on this one, is I've sometimes slipped up and said, well, you know, the data standards that were created by the joint working group, and everybody sort of throws their hands up and says, they're not data standards, they're data requirements and digital threads, and you got to be very careful. So the question that I've been asked a lot is, will these data requirements eventually become standards, and what's being done to move that conversation along?
This is it's an ever evolving conversation after the publication. So what I will state is my experience and give you my 2 cents, right? Because it's not a Ted Weitzman decision. It's a CII and membership and industry decision, right? But I doubt that CII as an organization will want to get into standards development, certification, and publication. You know, it's not the kind of body that it traditionally has been. Could change, but my recommendation as of today would be that the AWP data requirements as published by CII do not become a standard. But there is an onus on CII membership to ensure that these AWP data requirements as published are taken into consideration by the well-established standards bodies. And if you know who those are, I don't have to talk about them. If you don't know who they are, feel free to reach out to me or probably anybody else on this call to talk about the landscape, and expect some CII research and publications to come out about that landscape. But I do not anticipate this set of work to magically change names to CII AWP data standard. It would be my recommendation that it stays quote unquote requirement. And Lloyd is correct. You know, I am one of the ones that will frequently, especially as the current chair of that group, handing over to Tom Morris and Stephen Jones of Shell very soon as I transition to another role. But you know, I would frequently ensure that we are stating properly that it is not a internationally controlled standard, as anybody who works for that type of information would reference it as. Yogesh, what can you clarify or add there, please?
I guess when you talk about standards, immediately the mind goes to ISO standards, ISO 15926, that governs our space quite a bit. And the 3 authoring tools more or less have all this data that you have compiled in the details here. Probably what's missing there might be the additional attributes that we are adding as part of the AWP execution that could make it. But again, when you look at it from an asset perspective, how many EWPs you made and CWPs, and so once the asset is turned over, there might be debate that do we want to see all that information passed out into a permanent standard type and asset data transfer, or does it all disappear now you have the plant? Obviously, my own point of view, I'd like to also keep the information of how it was built, because when you talk about digital twin and the data, etc., related to that, I'd also like to see the twin of execution. So certainly there are these are, I would say, uncharted territories in terms of standardizing what comes out of AWP.
And I want to give a why too, because I think that that's important for context, and why this team decided to say data requirement instead of data standard. A published data standard requires a level of rigor that would have inhibited this team's ability to actually publish. If CII even decided to take on that type of work, it's a much more cumbersome, rigorous process to create what I would consider a standard that certainly is recognized within this industry for data. And this team never really set out to supply that type of quote-unquote rigor around what was published. It was important to get the publication out, to get this recommendation, the set of requirements out in a timely manner, because industry needed it, and none of us wanted to get bogged down in that. I'm just going to use that word rigor again, with that rigor that is usually associated with the standard. And that is why we were so careful in saying that it's a quote unquote requirement. We could have used any other kind of word in association with it, but standard. So just keep that in mind. It's just what the team settled on. And we can, debate nomenclature all day, but just know that that was our intent, and it is documented in the guidelines. So.
Great.
So we're going to move to the formal Q&A portion. Through go-to questions, I've already received a comment from Jay Moser, and he was really pivotal in getting this started. So, Steve, could you open up Jay's mic? And Jay, would you mind just giving us your comment, because I think you'll do more justice to it than I will. So,
one moment, Lloyd.
Yep.
Okay, Jay's good to go.
Yeah. Good morning and afternoon for those in London. So I just put a note into the comments for Lloyd. I'm glad you put me on. First of all, again, kudos to this team and the efforts that they've put into this. I think the requirements are a tremendous start. I do see a larger journey from an owner's perspective in this arena. And we in Shell have agreed with this team. I haven't talked to Stephen or CII too much about it yet, but we have agreed to drive the first pass of the data model, which we have complete, between CFOS and the AWP requirements. And two of our people, Steve Jones and Eric, will work with the team to actually do some review and let's just say checking of that. And I'm hoping by June 1st we would have a pretty well completed effort there. And that's going to be kind of an initial start in my mind to even having a discussion about an industry standard. We do have IOGP, who has a data team put together who is wanting to standardize or come up with a standard. And they're looking into this. They're now engaged with CII as well. And so, I'm not saying where it's going to go. All I'm saying is that the more we can do to make things standard for the industry, for the EPCs, the technology firms, and the ability to use data, good data that's clean, the better off we're going to be. And the data platform side of that discussion, which is different, it's still a huge opportunity that needs to be addressed as well. So a lot of good work in this area, and a lot of stuff that all of you all brought to the table that have really helped. So just leave it with that, Lloyd.
Thanks very much for that, Jay. Appreciate it. We also have another question in the questions panel, and Steve has flashed up the Slido QR code, so you can ask questions through Slido. I'll just go to the question we already have in the go-to webinar questions panel. So the question for the team, and you can decide who would like to tackle it, is the digital threads, should they be created in line with EWPs, PWPs, CWPs, IWPs? What's your recommendation, and how do we tackle this? Is it by discipline? And we are getting kind of acronym heavy. So engineering work package, procurement work package, construction work package, installation work package.
John, sorry, go ahead, Lloyd.
Yeah, who would like to start that response?
I can if. Yeah, sure. I'll take it. So, I think John touched on this. We were really conscientious as we went through this of trying to. We're generating a lot of data today, right, as an industry, and not trying to completely reinvent the wheel. So we were very conscientious around where does this source data live today, and I'll make up an example. So if I have a piping isometric, what you'll see as you go through those data requirements is we really I think use this idea of AWP attributes, right? So I can tie that isometric to an EWP, to a CWP, to an IWP, to a test system or a turnover system. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers the question, but I don't think you necessarily have to approach it strictly from the idea of what package type does which thread map to. The data requirements are set up to where at the appropriate function and the right place in the job, right, is you can tag that using that AWP structure. I think it's a very similar idea to what. I keep giving kudos to Shell. I enjoyed their presentation yesterday. This idea of you get that AWP coding into the project early and how it carries through, right, and links the whole thing together. You'll see the data requirements reflect that very idea.
Great.
Yeah, I can add
to.
Go ahead. I think if we are looking at as soon as you sign the contract, where do you begin in terms of data or standardizing on it? Tom touched on it. It is the coding and numbering that you start off with the work breakdown structure and the model naming convention, the work package numbering, etc. That's where you start with the data thread, if I will say, and then it starts reflecting in so many areas, whether it is your purchase orders, MTOs, or any other place. So I would say the starting point is the coding and numbering that you set out as soon as you sign the contract. It could be as related or unrelated. That could be cost codes, estimates, and others as well that you follow along with your work breakdown structure.
Great. Any other comments?
I'd like to add a little something more to that as well. Sorry. There was a part of that question about should we start with disciplines. Some of these threads you can do by discipline, say like piping or equipment. Some of them you're going to find you need multiple disciplines for, like the index or the 3D model or procurement. And then in all of these threads, and one of the questions was, is it EWP, IWP, PWP driven? We tell you whether or not we feel that table connects to which work packaging system. So they're there in descriptions for you to look at to see. Some of them are going to be all for work packaging, EWP, IWP, CWP, all those acronyms. But some of them are only associated to say a work package or a construction work area. So we've kind of identified some of that for you to help you get started and really kind of group them together.
I would say the place, and I'm sorry, Lloyd, this is an important question. I would say the place to start is download the implementation guideline. Read it, and then I guarantee you that if you reach out to any of the names that are there on in the documentation as being members of the team, if you reach out to any of us, we'll be more than happy to answer questions and/or guide, or come and join us in the AWP Joint Working Group with CII if you're members, right? But I would say that's a free download, and a lot of effort. There was a tremendous amount of effort in reviewing and actually creating the data requirements themselves, but there was probably equal amount of effort that went into the development of that implementation guideline that has a lot of information related to that question on how you use.
And just to follow up on what you said, Ted, in FeedLoop, if you go to the area where the sessions are, there's a tab called networking. It'll actually allow you to send messages directly to members of the panel or other people speaking at the conference or other conference attendees. So strongly recommend you take advantage of that. I've got one other question that's come to us through GoToWebinar, and then we'll take a look at the ones on Slido. And the question is, are there any standards relative to how to best capture regulatory compliance requirements?
Yogesh is shaking his head yes.
No, I'm saying that's a good question, but I do not know if the team really looked at it from that perspective of what is required from a regulatory point of view. Largely, it would be related to safety and other aspects of it, which probably is built into the standards rather than the data requirements that have been put out here. In the same vein, there is the CFI HOS data requirement that have we looked into that. I would ask Ted and the group to see if you looked at other data collection type of standards, either in PyStep or 15926 or CFI HOS, or was this done in its own way?
So what I would say is that is a question that goes outside the bounds of the CII AWP data requirements, but you certainly have some expertise here that can address that to some degree. But certainly, when it comes to the development of the AWP data requirements, I would say that the phrase regulatory requirement, if it was brought up once, it was once. I mean, the focus here was on AWP best practice, and the data that would be needed, whether it's regulatory or not, that would be required to support an AWP deployment in a digital environment, right?
Yeah.
So we've probably got time for two more questions. So looking at the questions that are on your monitor, which one would you like to address? Which two would you like to address? So let's go to the first question. Ted, is there one there that jumps out at you?
Well, I think there are two that can be answered very quickly.
Okay.
If that's okay. Have you identified gaps in the AWP data requirements? Yes. Concrete immediately pops to mind. In foundations, we've already talked about those. There are others, and they will be addressed in future iterations. Right. The team attacked what it could. Right. They are again evergreen. The other one was the one about the database. Yes. When we say especially virtual construction model, it is not 3D model. It's a virtual construction model that includes 1D, 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D. How many ever Ds you want to add? It's a model of both data. Well, a model is data, right? Zeros and ones. It's all zeros and ones. It is comprehensive, and absolutely, I would recommend that it be managed in maybe a database or multiple databases, depending on your system's architecture. So I think we knock those out, Lloyd.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I fully expected this was going to happen. We had more questions than we could handle in the time allotted. But please, if you reach out to the team, they will get back to you. So send them a message with your questions, and they will attempt to respond back to you. Great presentation, team. The one thing I will sort of add in closing is the work that was done by the joint working group is quite amazing. And the next step is to take that and have it adopted, not just in North America, not in Canada, not just in the States, but globally. So groups like ECI and groups in other parts of the world, as they start to adopt these requirements and these digital many of the companies that are here are global in nature. You can actually influence the adoption of these as global requirements. And we strongly recommend that you not only download the requirements for yourself, but you share them throughout your organization, because no matter how good your standards are, if we can come up with global requirements, global digital threads, we'll get much greater value in the long run. So again, want to thank the presentation team. We're now moving into a break, so there's going to be some networking going on. I'm actually facilitating the owner only session, and that's the only session we have that is restrictive. It doesn't allow for the other groups, just the owners, and that's intentional. We want to make it a safe place for the owners to share what they're feeling good about, what they're concerned about. So we do request that if you're not an owner, don't go to that session. But we have two other great sessions that you can attend, and I'll let you break now to either go to a networking session or deal with other things. The one thing I have put a couple of notes through the feed loop app, but we do have in the sponsorship lounge, there's some examples there of videos on how technology can be used. I get asked that a lot. Can you tell me who can help with implementation? And we've got a couple of SMEs here on that. So if you haven't done so already, please make a point of going to the sponsorship booths as well. So we'll take our break now, and I will be heading over to the owner session. And thank you all. Thanks, team.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.